A whip of wind howled through the cottonwoods, rattling the window panes like brittle teeth. Inside the ranch house stood near silent, but for the low creak of an old chair and the scrape of a spoon against a chipped tin bowl. He sat at the table alone, hunched over stew gone lukewarm. The fire had burned low. Shadows dragged long across the floor, reaching for his boots like old deaths come calling. He didn't flinch when the knock came. It was soft, too soft for a man with bad intentions. Too steady for a lost traveler, he waited spoon-poised midair listening another knock. Then quiet he rose tall, weather-worn mid-30s, with hands that bore the calluses of cattle rope, and past violence the rifle leaned by the door, but he didn't take it, not yet. Outside the wind kicked dust and ice and crooked swirls. The lantern hanging on the porch swung gently, casting a ghost light over the steps, and on those steps, framed by dusk and doubt, stood a woman with wild eyes in a worn dress. 2 children clung to the folds of her skirt. One boy, maybe 6, clutching a ragged satchel. One girl, younger, her boots far too big, her cheeks hollow with cold. The woman blinked once, then said, "They ain't yours, but they need you." You stared. Words didn't come easy to him on the best of days, and this wasn't one of them. His mouth worked before his thoughts caught up. "You're at the wrong place." "No," she said, "I'm not." The boy's lip trembled, but he didn't cry. The girl leaned into her mother like she'd been doing it for years. He couldn't see their faces clearly in the lantern light, only the outline of desperation and something else, something dogged. He stepped forward enough to catch her scent: mud, horse sweat, and lye soap. She wasn't a drifter, not quite. Her boots were mended by hand. Her dress had once been red. "Who sent you?" "No one," she said. "Not lately." He let the silence stretch until the cold bit deeper. Then, without warning, he stepped back and shut the door. The bolt slid into place with a thunk. He stood behind it, heart thudding like it had when he was younger and quicker, and carried a name men remembered. He hated how his hand lingered on the doorknob. He hated even more how he heard her voice in his mind, low, certain, not begging, but bleeding. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning they were still there, huddled on the porch, the children tucked beneath her shawl like small, stubborn ghosts. He cursed under his breath and swung the door wide. "You'll take breakfast in the barn," he said. She nodded, didn't thank him. He respected that. They moved slowly, stiff with cold, and the boy looked back once, as if memorizing the house in case it vanished. He kept one hand tied around a tin soldier with a missing head. Inside the barn, the woman didn't sit until both children were settled on a hay bale. He handed her a bundle bread, jerky, hard apples, and turned to go. "Why me?" he asked, pausing by the door. "Out of all the doors you could have knocked on." She broke off a piece of bread and passed it to her daughter. "Because yours was the only name I remembered." He didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. That afternoon, the boy followed him out to the fence line uninvited. The snow had melted into spring muck, and his boots kept sticking in the soil, but he didn't complain. Just watched with wide eyes as the man hammered a loose rail back into place. "You know how to work?" the man asked, voice dry. The boy nodded. "Then hold the nail bucket and don't wander. You did dropped it once when a jackrabbit darted by and flushed red with embarrassment." The man didn't yell, just grunted. When the work was done, he handed the boy a piece of jerky and said, "Don't eat it. Near the horses, they'll come sniffing." The boy beamed, then ran back toward the barn. Halfway there, he turned and waved. The man didn't wave back, but he watched until the boy disappeared. By dusk, he found a drawing pinned to the barn door. Crayon on the back of a church bulletin. 3 stick figures, 2 small, 1 tall, all holding hands. He stood looking at it a long time. When he entered the barn that night, the children were asleep. The woman stood near the lantern, sharpening a kitchen knife like she meant to use it. "If you think to rob me," he said, "you picked a poor mark." She smirked without looking up. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead." "I cleaned that knife to gut a rabbit." He didn't ask where she found a rabbit, just leaned against the stall post and folded his arms. "You still haven't told me your name." She set the knife down carefully. "Would it matter? Makes it easier to know whether to trust you." She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw something under the surface. Fear, yes, but also grief thick as molasses. I was married once, she said, to a man who drank too much and lost more than just money at the tables. When he ran out of coin, he promised the boy to a trader, and when I said no, he raised his hand. The barn went still. So I left, she continued, took them and ran. Didn't stop until the horse dropped dead under me. Found this town on a whisper. He felt the air shift, the fire pop in the lantern. He thought of his brother's grave, not 30 yards from the barn, marked by a single stone and the promise he'd made to never let someone suffer under his roof again. You said you knew my name, she nodded. Your brother used to bring supplies to the town I lived in. Once he gave me a coat when winter came early. Said his little brother back home never did learn to button it right. That ghost rose between them now. The man stepped back from it. Your children, they his, no, she said softly, but they need someone who remembers what kind this smells like. He left without another word. 4 days after they shared the property, but not the silence. The boy kept following him, asking questions about cattle and whether and how to spot a rattler in the grass. The girl stayed near her mother, but once he caught her feeding an apple slice to his old hound, who hadn't trusted anyone since the war. At night, he heard the woman humming something low and mournful. It wasn't a song. It was a memory and melody. He almost asked her once, "What's the real reason you came here?" But the words stuck because if he asked, she might answer, and he didn't know if he could carry what that answer cost. Then came the 4th night. He was on the porch carving a bit of pine when he saw the dust trail coming fast across the ridge. One rider, maybe two, moving with purpose. He whistled low. The woman came out, eyes wary. The children followed. "Get back in the barn," he said. Now she didn't argue, just herded the little ones inside and grabbed the kitchen knife. He noted how steady her hands were. The rider reached the fence line and slowed. Tall man in a black duster, eyes hidden beneath a broad hat. His horse was L, dared from hard riding. You the one running with 2 brats and a stolen name. The man called out. The rancher stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. Depends who's asking, the man grinned. No one you want to meet twice. What's your business? Reckon she's got something don't belong to her. She doesn't belong to anyone, the rancher said, voice flat. Move on. The man's eyes gleamed wolfish. Didn't expect to find a hero out here in the sticks. I ain't a hero, no, said the rider. You're a fool. He turned his horse and rode off slow, not in retreat, but like someone scouting a weak wall. A promise in his posture. The rancher stood until the dust settled. Then he turned, walked inside and bolted the door. The children were quiet, the girl's arms around the boy like she'd done it 100 times. The woman watched him waiting. Pack light. He said, "We may not stay long." She took a breath, then let it go. "You believe me now." He didn't answer, but that night he moved a second blanket into the barn, and when the wind rose again, it carried no knock, but it brought something colder, something coming, something that would not be turned away twice. The morning came thick with low fog and a cold that lingered in the bones. The cattle moved slow through the pasture, steam rising off their backs like smoke from dying fires. He watched them from the porch with a tin cup in hand and eyes narrowed against memory. From the barn, the widow stepped out. She wore his old coat now, sleeves rolled up and belt cinched tight. Around her narrow waist, she moved with caution but not fear, like someone testing ground after a storm. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the pump. She nodded back, filled a tin pail, and disappeared inside again. It had been 5 days since she'd arrived, and the silence between them had become a strange kind of agreement. They didn't talk about where she'd come from, or where the man in the black duster might return from. They just moved around each other, 2 ghosts pretending to be alive. That evening the boy followed him again. Fence, he grunted. That was permission enough. They walked the eastern line in companionable quiet. The boy boots still too big carried the nailed tin without being asked. When they reached the downed rail, the man handed him a hammer. "Think you can do it?" The boy nodded. His hand shook as he raised the hammer and missed the first swing. Hit the post. Instead, wincing, he looked up for scolding. None came. "Try again," the man said. He did. The next swing landed, then another. Crooked but strong. When the last nail was set, the boy stood taller, smiled. The man handed him a strip of jerky and said, "Tomorrow we do the western line." "Bring better boots." The boy ran ahead, laughter trailing behind like bird song. Back at the house, the girl waited on the steps with a basket of small stones. She handed one to the man with solemn care. "It's got a hole in it," she said, like the moon. He looked. It did, round and worn smooth. "By water and time, thank you." She beamed and skipped off. Inside, the widow was sweeping the floor with a pine broom she must have found in the cellar. The hearth crackled behind her, and the scent of beans and ash filled the air. "You cook?" he asked. "Since I was 9. You clean, too?" She paused. "If that's a problem, I'll stop." He shook his head. "I'm not used to folks doing things without asking what they'll get for it." She looked at him then, not coldly, just long enough that he felt it. "I don't owe you," she said, "but I won't be a burden either." He left it there. Children ate quietly, eyes darting from spoon to spoon like they weren't sure the food would last. When it did, the girl whispered, "Thank you," and the boy wiped his mouth with his sleeve like he'd never been taught better. That night, he gave them the guest room, a room no one had used in 5 years. It smelled of cedar and dust and old ghosts. He sat by the fire long after they'd gone to bed, listening. The woman's footsteps passed overhead, a soft hum, then stillness. He didn't sleep. The next day, he caught her scrubbing laundry at the creek with rocks and grit and bare hands red from cold. "You'll freeze your damn fingers off," he said. "I've done worse." She replied without looking up. "Where'd you learn to fight?" She stopped. "I never said I could." "You held that knife like someone who had." She stood slowly. "A man taught me, not my husband, someone kinder." His mouth twisted. "There ain't many of those left." "No," she said, "there ain't." He handed her a bar of soap. It smelled faintly of lilac. Her eyes flicked to his. He didn't explain where he'd found it. That evening, she joined him on the porch. She didn't ask permission, and he didn't offer protest. They watched the sun bleed behind the hills like a dying fire, sky lit in gold and crimson. The girl curled up near the dog, using his belly as a pillow. The boy practiced tying knots with fence rope. "He looks up to you," she said. "He shouldn't." "Why not?" He took a breath. "Because I've done things I'm not proud of." She looked at him steady. "So has every man still breathing." The silence thickened, but not painfully. It settled like dust after motion. "They ask about you when you're not around," she said. "What do they ask?" "Mostly what you used to be." I told him you were the man who still had good wood in the fire, even if the flames got low. His laugh was rough. "That ain't true." "No," she said, "but maybe it could be." He looked out toward the hills where the shadows ran. "Long and lean, they your blood?" She blinked. "No," that surprised him. He said, "Nothing. Their mother died giving birth to the girl. I was her sister. Their father died 2 winters later. I kept them because no one else would." "Why? Tell me now." "Because you asked." Later that night, the boy left something on the kitchen table, a crude wooden carving of a horse. The legs were uneven, and it didn't stand upright, but it was meant as a gift. The man kept it. 2 days passed, no sign of the rider, no knock in the night. Peace settled thin as ice on a river. He found himself walking softer through the halls, found the sound of children's laughter less jarring, found himself eating slower, watching her as she moved, graceful even in weariness. He was beginning to forget that she hadn't come to stay. That changed on the 7th day. He was chopping wood behind the house when he saw movement on the hill. He ducked low, slid his rifle off the porch hook, and scanned the ridge. A figure riding slow, watching. When the man moved, the rider turned back, disappearing into the trees. He waited, breathful, nothing. That evening, he didn't say a word about it, but he checked the locks, loaded extra rounds, sat closer to the fire. The widow watched him quietly. "You saw something," she said. "I did." "You think he's coming?" "I know he is." She stepped closer. "We can leave." "You can't." "I won't." "Why?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because running never worked for me, and it won't work for them." She nodded, accepting it. Not liking it, the boy came in holding up a splintered board. "Found this by the shed." Carved into it were the initials. The rancher stiffened. "Where exactly?" "Near the smokehouse." He stood, took the board, and stepped out into the dark. At the base of the smokehouse, the dirt was disturbed. Fresh tracks heeled deep. Someone had circled the barn, tested the windows, and walked away, but not far. Back inside, the fire burned low. The air was too still. He turned to the widow. "There's something you're still not saying." Her face palled. "He's not after me," she whispered. "He's after the boy." The boy blinked. "Why me?" She knelt beside him. "Because you weren't born like others." The rancher narrowed his eyes. "What's that mean?" She hesitated. Then his father wasn't a traitor. He was a Pinkerton informant. The boy was born while his father was embedded with a gang of land thieves. They think the boy knows where the records are hidden. Does he? She shook her head. No, but they think he does. The man stood still for a long while. Then he walked to the fire, tossed the carved board into the flames, and watched it burn. "The name on that board," he said, "that was the man who killed my brother." She looked up slowly. "I didn't know. I believe you." The boy's voice was small. "Are we in trouble?" The man crouched beside him. "Yes, but trouble's got rules out here, and I know most of them outside." The wind shifted. The dog growled low. Someone whistled. 3 notes, then silence. The man stood. "Get the children upstairs." But now the widow obeyed. No argument, just urgency. He stepped onto the porch, rifle raised, and stared into the dark. The trees didn't move. The stars blinked overhead like indifferent witnesses. He didn't call out. He just waited. A footstep sounded behind the barn, then quiet, then another whistle, same 3 notes. He tightened his grip. Behind him, the girl cried out once, just a short, sharp sound. The man's breath caught. He didn't move toward the noise. He moved toward the shadow. The night broke open like a rotten tooth. He moved through the dark without sound, rifle cradled in his arms, boots gliding over familiar dirt. The moon hung low, yellow, swollen, half-veiled by drifting clouds. The wind had stilled as if the prairie itself was holding its breath. Behind the barn, a figure crouched near the window, tall, hunched, working something with wire. The rancher raised his rifle and stepped forward slow. "You lost." The figure froze, then rose, hands up. A scrawny man with patchy stubble, one eye milky white, clothes torn and reeking of horse sweat. "Don't shoot," he rasped. "I ain't here to kill." "Then why were you picking at my window like a raccoon?" The man lowered his hands. "He sent me. That name's about to mean less than dirt. He just wants the boy. That's it. Says he won't burn nothing else if you hand the brat over." The rancher stepped closer. The shadows cut lines across his jaw. Made his eyes look hollow. "I ain't handing over a damn thing. He'll come for him anyhow. You know that. I'm just the warning bell." The rifle but hit the man's stomach before he could blink. He dropped like a sack of meal, gasping. The rancher dragged him into the smokehouse and tied him to a beam with rusted chain. "Don't shout," he warned, "or I'll forget I left you breathing." He locked the door. Back in the house, the girl had stopped crying. The boy sat with her under the table, holding her hand, trying to be brave. The widow was pacing, blade in hand, face pale but not fragile. "What happened?" she asked. "Scout, nothing more. You think he'll come tonight?" "No, not yet. Men like that prefer daylight. They want the fear to be visible." She exhaled and leaned on the wall. Her knees buckled just slightly. "You need rest," he said. "I'll rest when this ends." He didn't argue. The next day bloomed dry and angry. Dust clung to the air. The cattle paced nervously, hoofs striking the dirt like war drums. He questioned the man in the smokehouse before breakfast. The man was wheezing but still smug. "He's riding with 2 more iron hands, crack shots both." "What's the plan?" "Wait until you're low, until your guard slips. Might burn the barn. Maybe start with the dog." The rancher's hand tightened around the rifle. "You afraid yet?" The man asked. "No," he said. "I'm remembering. That afternoon he taught the boy to shoot. The rifle was too big, the recoil too strong, but the boy's hands were steady. He listened. He didn't flinch." "You ever kill a man?" the boy asked. The rancher nodded once. "Why?" "Because he needed it." The boy didn't ask more. In the kitchen, the widow was boiling water. She'd found dried herbs in the cellar and was making a pus for a wound that hadn't happened yet. He watched her stir, then said, "You knew him, didn't you?" "Who?" "Arisp." She stirred slower. "Not by name, but by deed." She nodded. "He was one of the men my husband dealt with, one of the ones who laughed when the whip came down." His voice was quiet. You stayed with him long, too long, but not by choice. He didn't press. The truth was in her hands in the way they trembled when they weren't busy. That night, the tied man in the smokehouse tried to escape. They found the door half broken, the chain bent, blood smeared across the wall. He had almost made it out the window. Almost. The rancher stood over him, shotgun in hand. Try again, and I'll feed you to the hogs. The man spat blood and grinned. He'll make you beg. You think you're righteous. You're just another dying breed. Maybe, the rancher said, but I'm harder to kill than I look. He doubled the locks. 2 mornings later, they woke to smoke on the horizon. Not fire, gunpowder, a warning. They're here, the widow said. He's letting us know. He gathered ammunition, loaded the rifles, dug shallow foxholes behind the shed. Get the children inside, he told her. Down in the cellar, she hesitated. You can't do this alone. I'm not alone, he said. You're here. She touched his arm once, not softly, with the strength of someone who'd already buried pieces of herself. When the sun reached its peak, the riders came, 3 of them just like the scout said. Ours led them tall in his saddle, coat flapping, beard streaked with gray and malice. The others wore bandanas and carried rifles like they were born to them. The rancher stepped onto the porch. This ends now, ours called. It ended the day you killed my brother. Eris blinked, then laughed, that scrawny puppet, Bitter Creek. He squealed like a girl. The rancher didn't respond. You give us the boy, ours said, and we ride out. You keep him, and we burn this place to the soil. He's not yours to take. He's not yours either. He is now. Ours raised a hand. The other spread out. Last chance, he said. The rancher raised his rifle and fired. 1 rider dropped. Clean shot to the chest. The gunfight erupted like thunder. Bullets tore through the porch rail. The rancher dove behind a barrel and returned fire sharp and fast. The dog barked wildly, then yelped, a grazing shot to the leg. Inside, the boy clutched his sister in the cellar. The widow watched from the window, rifle in hand, breath steady. She saw one of the riders circle the barn and slipped toward the house. She moved, met him near the side door. He raised his weapon, but not before she fired. The bullet caught him in the neck. He fell without grace, twitching. Her hands trembled afterward, but not before. Outside, R screamed and charged the porch. The rancher stepped out, blood on his arm, a gash on his temple. He and Ares faced off 10 paces apart. You don't know what the boy's worth. Ares growled, I don't care. You die for a stranger's brat. The rancher's voice was Josero. He ain't a stranger anymore. Ares fired first. Missed the rancher's bull, it didn't. Ours dropped, eyes wide, mouth open like he wanted to say something, but the words died in his throat before his body hit the ground. It was over in 12 heartbeats. He stood still a moment longer, just breathing. The widow stepped onto the porch, face pale. You're hurt, she said. I've been worse. You're bleeding. He looked down. So I am. She tore cloth from her dress and pressed it to his side. Inside, the boy peeked up from the cellar and said, Is it safe now? He nodded. They buried the bodies at the edge of the pasture. The tied man from the smokehouse begged for mercy, but the rancher gave him the choice, leave or be planted beside the rest. He left limping. The next morning, the widow found the rancher near the barn, sharpening his knife in the rising light. Why'd you do it? She asked. What? Stand for us? He didn't look at her, because I remember what it's like to be unwanted. You still feel that way? He paused. Not today. She walked closer. You should rest. He looked at her finally. Really looked? You going to watch over me, if you'll let me? He stood slow and stiff and handed her the blade. I trust you, he said. She took it without flinching. In the distance, the boy chased the dog across the grass. The girl picked wild flowers and tucked them into the fence posts. Peace came not like a sudden light, but like warmth in the bones. After a long winter, he turned to the woman. They'll ask questions when word spreads about who you are, why you're here. She nodded, and what do you tell them? He asked. That I came looking for kindness, and I found it behind a door I didn't think would open. He didn't speak for a long time. That I'm glad you knocked. The fire had been out for hours, but its warmth lingered in the floorboards. He sat at the table, shirt off, a long gash running from his rib to hip, stitched roughly, clean, poorly. The boy had helped where he could, hands steady, eyes wide. The girl had fetched water. The widow had done the rest. Now she stood at the hearth, boiling willow bark in a dented pot, her sleeves rolled and her jaw tight with focus. He watched her in the silence between crackles. "You should have let me bleed," he said. She stirred without turning. "You didn't give me the option. You could have taken the children and gone. They wouldn't have left you." That quieted him. When she brought the pus, he braced for the sting, but it didn't come. Her touch was gentle, careful, warm. She worked in silence, her breath soft, her face drawn close. "You've done this before," he murmured. She nodded. "My sister had a husband who fought for cattle barons, used to come home with more holes than sets. You patch him up, too." "No," she said. "He wouldn't let me," said kindness made him weak. He let that hang in the air, thick as steam. She pressed a clean cloth to the wound and sat across from him. The fire threw gold across her face, carving shadows down her cheek. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I figured." She hesitated. "Then I knew your brother, not just in passing. He didn't speak. I was there when he died. Still, he said nothing. My husband took me with him to Bitter Creek. Said it was for supplies. I didn't know what he meant to do until the shooting started. I ran to the back room, tried to pull a boy out from under the table. His voice was gravel. That was my nephew." She nodded. "He was scared. Smoke everywhere. I told him to crawl. He tried. The beam fell before I could reach him. His hands clenched on the table's edge. The veins in his forearms stood like cords. I pulled him out anyway," she said, "but he was gone." He looked at her slow and cold. "You never said. I didn't think it would matter." "It matters." She folded her hands. "He wore a blue scarf. You tied it, didn't you?" His jaw twitched. "I kept it," she said. "I buried him in it." He looked away, but the pain rose in him like a tide. He'd never told anyone how he blamed himself that he was supposed to meet his brother that day, but overslept, drunk, and angry at God. "How old were you then?" he asked. 18. "And you stayed with that man after?" There was nowhere else. The kettle hissed behind her, releasing steam like a sigh. "I wanted to die that night," she said, "but I saw your brother's face, and I thought maybe one of us should carry the memory right." He looked back at her. "You think you did?" I tried. Outside the wind rattled a loose shutter. The boy's laughter echoed faintly from the yard. "You brought his killer to my doorstep," he said, voice low. "I didn't know he was still with them, but you knew his kind." She nodded once. He stood, winced, and limped to the window. The sun was bleeding into the hills, amber turning to rust. "He died screaming," the rancher said, voice barely above a whisper. She stood slowly. "I know." He looked over his shoulder. "Why come here?" "Because I wanted to see if a man like your brother had a brother worth saving." He didn't answer. That night she sat on the porch while the children slept. He joined her with a blanket over his shoulders and a jug of something strong between them. They passed it back and forth without talking. The stars came out sharp, brighter than he remembered. Coyotes sang far off, their howl stitched into the silence like thread through worn leather. "I ain't good at forgiveness," he said. "I ain't asking for it." He looked at her. "Then what are you asking for?" She turned her face toward the night. "Somewhere to stop running." He took a long drink. "You're not the same girl who was there at Bitter Creek," he said, "and you're not the same man who didn't show up." The jug passed between them again. "You were drunk?" She asked. He nodded. "Tried to pick a fight with a priest the night before." She let out a small laugh. "Did you win?" "No." He hit harder than I expected. They sat in silence a while, the kind that didn't hurt. Then she said, "The girl thinks you're made of stone." "And the boy?" "He thinks you're the one thing in the world that won't break on him." He breathed slow. "I ain't made for children," he said. "No one is. Not until they're staring up at you, waiting to see what you'll become." He rubbed the scar on his knuckle. "What do you see when you look at me?" She answered without pause. "A man who doesn't run from fire anymore." The wind shifted. The stars blinked. He stood joint stiff. "Get some sleep. We've got fencing to mend tomorrow." She didn't move, just nodded. Inside, the children had fallen asleep, curled beside the dog, who now limped, but never left their side. The boy still held the tin soldier. The girl had one of the carved fence posts he'd let her keep. In the quiet, she whispered, "Thank you." He paused. "For what?" "For opening the door." He didn't say it, but his breath caught before he turned away. The fire in the hearth burned low but steady, and that night he didn't dream of Bitter Creek. The wind rolled in just before dawn, dry and restless, kicking dust up the hill and into the porch boards. A strange quiet gripped the land, the kind that comes when something's about to snap. Even the cattle stayed close to the fence, eyes trained eastward. He'd been up for hours, sitting in the dark with his rifle across his lap, and his thoughts thick as molasses. The woman had tried to sleep, but the tension in the house pressed too heavy on the wall. The boy stirred once and asked if the sun was coming yet. He told him not until it's safe. The girl hadn't spoken at all. She just lay curled in the corner, her little hand gripping the hem of her brother's coat. The dog sat beside her, tail thumping every few minutes as if keeping time. They all felt it coming. He rose slowly and opened the door, letting the gray-blue light spill over his boots. No color in the world yet, just shadows and cold. It smelled like metal, like gun oil and coming rain. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the tree-ane. No movement yet. Behind him, the widow stood barefoot on the wood, hair unbound, holding a shotgun like it belonged to her. She said nothing, just met his eyes and nodded once. They moved together. Down by the barn, he dug shallow trenches and set up fence rails as makeshift cover. Not enough to stop a real ambush, but enough to buy time. He crouched behind the frontmost post and motioned for her to take the flank. Still no sound but the wind. Then came the whistle, 3 notes long and low. Same as before. He scanned the ridge. This time they weren't baiting him. They were coming. The riders broke from the trees like storm clouds on horseback. 3 men on dark jellings, rifles ready, eyes hard. One of them had a red scarf tied around his arm. Another rode with a curved knife between his teeth. The third was too far back to read, but something about the shape of his shoulders made the rancher's skin crawl. The widow breathed steady beside him, shoulders squared. She took aim. Wait for it, he muttered. The hoofbeat hats grew louder, heavier, shaking dust from the leaves and loose nails from the porch. They were close now, no turning back. He saw the flash of metal rifle raised, then he fired. The first rider dropped like a sack of oats, his mount spinning and screaming. The second veered off to the left, trying to loop wide. The third kept coming. The widow fired once, hitting the red scarf man in the shoulder. He screamed and fell, crawling for cover. She loaded again without a word. The last rider charged straight through the smoke, firing twice. One bullet shattered a fence post inches from the rancher's head. The second grazed his side just enough to tear skin and hiss like a promise. The rancher stood tall, stepped out, and shot the man clean through the chest. The rider toppled forward, landing in a heap of broken reins and blood. Silence, then a scream, not fear, rage. From behind the shed, a fourth man rose. Stocky, brutal eyes like black coal. He wasn't riding, he'd circled on foot. The widow turned to fire, but he was faster. He tackled her to the ground, sending the shotgun flying. The rancher shouted, sprinting toward them. The boy burst from the house, holding the old revolver they'd hidden under the floorboard. No. The rancher yelled, "Get back!" But the boy kept coming. The attacker snarled and grabbed the widow by the throat, knife drawn, blood across his sleeve. She clawed at his hand, kicking wildly, gasping. The boy raised the revolver. The rancher dubbed between them, shoulder first, slamming the attacker off her and onto the dirt. The 2 men grappled, rolling through blood and grit, fists flying, the knife slashing wild. The rancher took a cut to the cheek, another to the hand, but he didn't stop, couldn't. This wasn't just defense. This was penance. He headbutted the man hard enough to crack bone, then pressed his forearm to the man's throat. "You came for a child," he growled, "and you found me instead." The man spit blood. "You ain't his father." "I am now." And then the widow fired, one clean shot to the chest. The attacker's body went limp beneath him. He stood slowly, breath ragged, bleeding from too many places to count. The widow rose too, shaking. Her hands were red, her jaw set. The boy stood frozen at the steps, revolver at his side. The sun broke the horizon. Lights swept across the land, golden and wide, revealing what was left. 3 dead men, a smoking rifle, a bloodied knife in the dust. The girl ran from the house barefoot and crying, arms outstretched. The rancher knelt just in time to catch her. "It's over," he whispered. She nodded against his chest. "You didn't leave." "I won't." He looked at the boy. The boy looked back, something new in his face. Not fear, recognition. Later, after the bodies were buried and the wounds wrapped, the boy sat beside him on the porch, legs dangling over the edge. The girl braided grass into little circles. The widow washed blood. From the door, "Will they come again?" the boy asked. "Maybe. What will we do?" The rancher took a long breath. "Same thing we did today. Fight. Protect." The boy nodded like he understood the difference. That evening, the widow stepped inside, hair still wet from the creek. She looked at the room like she didn't expect it to still be standing. "I made supper," she said. He blinked. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He moved to the table. The food was simple. Beans, bread, salted beef, but it smelled like home. The girl said, "Grace." And the boy passed the cups without spilling. Afterward, they sat on the porch again. The air was warm. The sky streaked in pink. The rancher leaned back, a deep ache running through his ribs, and said, "You could leave now, if you wanted." The widow looked at him. "Do you want me to?" "No, then I won't." He turned to her. "You asked what I saw when I looked at you. I didn't know how to answer, and now I see someone who walked through fire and didn't turn to ash." She smiled, but her eyes shone. "I never thought I'd find a place where I didn't have to be afraid." He reached over and took her hand, rough calluses meeting delicate scars. "You're not afraid anymore, not when you're near." The moon climbed as the day faded. The children fell asleep on the porch swing, heads resting against each other. The rancher stood slowly and picked up the boy. "I'll take them in," he said. She carried the girl gently, and they laid them in the guest room. Back in the hallway, he paused. "You can have the bedroom tonight," he said. "I'll take the floor." She shook her head. "There's room for both." They didn't speak again, not for hours, but when sleep finally came, it came soft, without ghosts. And in the stillness before morning, he reached for her hand beneath the blanket and found it already waiting.